segue into our next one, which is the importance or the difference between good money and bad money and how difficult it is to fundraise if you're a deep tech startup. So for our next discussion, I'd like to invite Joanne Wong, Chair of IEEE Entrepreneurship and an investor at Rats Capital, and Dr. Waddah Al-Bassam, Chief Medical Officer at Alphayota, for a fireside chat on how to navigate the investment landscape for deep tech ventures. Thank you so much, Joanne and Dr. Waddah, for being here today. We're also supposed to have two more people join us, Dusan Dufek and Aya Zarnin, but unfortunately they had to apologize for a personal reason. However, I think we have an amazing fireside chat here with an investor and a founder of a deep tech startup. So, as you know, or as some people here know, deep tech is related to the development and the commercialization of very complex technologies, AI being one of them. And deep tech can be used in many sectors to kind of revolutionize the industry, including healthcare, for example. And we have seen the deep tech sector grow in the past year with expectation to reach almost $3.7 billion in market size in 2032. But at the same time, deep tech startups still face a lot of challenges in finding capital and finding funding. And I'm sure both of you here kind of see this from both sides of the coin, as investors and as founders trying to raise capital. So the first question I have for you is to get your opinion on what do you think are the biggest challenges for deep tech startups when it comes to raising funds, especially in the region. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Waddah.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for that invitation. And to be honest, my background is I'm a physician. And one of the most challenging things is understanding the financial part of a company. So getting that type of an orientation was the first important part of that journey. For me, as Alphayota, we started in the healthcare tech since 2022. Focusing on imaging and pathology and diagnostic tools in deep tech. I'm taking it in a background of a physician, so seeing the problems in the hospital, leading it to the investor part. So there is a huge difference between the investor understanding and the doctor or the main problem solutions that's needed there. One of the most important part is the technology is very difficult and very hard to make the investor to understand the importance of that, how to serve it. So this is the main problem I can see so far.
Joanne, would you like to add to that?
Let me just address from the medical point of view, it is a greater challenge. Yeah. And the reason for that is when an investor look at a med tech, is looking at how can this be deployed globally. And it could be just within a country or multiple countries because medical records, okay? It's so different and all the APIs are so different that it's very difficult to implement. And I don't know if it's the same thing in this region, but in the United States, each state is different. So you can be successful in one state, but you be challenged in another state. And it causes a lot of challenges for investors when they invest in medtech.
One of the other points that the healthcare per se, it's a green field, right, where you have a lot of ways to penetrate the market in deep tech. However, the still understanding the matter and the need, the demand for how it impact to the patient or the impact, the investor will have a little bit confusion, and that's one of the things. So keeping them aware of the technical things is one of the heartful thing for us.
An advantage for you is that you're a physician.
It is. It is in a way, yes.
It is. And the problem usually isn't a medical, it's more the administration. And that's where the challenge is. From a deep tech perspective, you can look at it two ways. AI globally, there is money in it, okay? Where there's less money is when you really go into the deep tech where you have hardware, which includes medtech, okay?
I had one question previously, is like one of the investors asked me, can I leave the technology operating on my mother alone? So that was the first question to me. Yeah, it is.
So safety.
For the safety, how to verify the process of technology and automated operating. So one of the things that you need to make sure that it's clinically can be used and safe. If you give it to someone like close to you, to your mom and so. So the question was not answered. I told them, no, I cannot. So we should inform them clearly how to depend on the technology and which level to do that as well.
Obviously, with the medical, you got to follow all the standards. Like it states it's FDA, and Europe is another health agency. And I presume here in Middle East Africa, there's other health agencies that you have to meet along the way. And so from, let's say with AI, it's easier from a global perspective. While here, I can't answer for the Middle East Africa, so I'm not familiar enough with this area. But also here's another interesting part when you're looking at deep tech from hardware perspective, especially some of our previous panelists were in helicopters, robotics, where the money there is, it's greater amount in Europe than in the United States. And Europe has been ahead of the game in deep tech. They understand, the investors understand it takes longer cycle. While the US, especially in the Silicon Valley, they just want the quick hit. And the quick hit comes from software enabled.
I think the same thing too. With us, they are looking for a plug and play. They want real estate, easy money, quick wins. Still, we don't have the complex investors that understand the technology and the future that is going in that direction. And I cannot sell future for them, telling them the impact, it will be this and that because of the cycle of this technology might be very short, it might be adaptation, it might be very as well shorter.
No, I agree with you there.
Interesting point on this. I just want to ask one more question to this point, Dr. Waddah. If let's say you're someone who's starting a deep tech startup in the region, how would you advise then these founders to find good money, to find good investors in the region that would be willing to take a chance on this investment, that would understand the complexity of the technology, and would be willing to go with these founders on that, let's say, development journey?
Well, first of all, from my side, I'm thinking about the VCs, firms that can understand the deep tech and have a successful story of investments. This is number one. Number two, I need the awareness and the importance of awareness of that deep tech in healthcare per se, for me is very important. I need to show them the impact on the patient, on how it will help the system, healthcare system, and educate them about that. This is one of the challenges that we need to work on. The good that the authorities in the GCC and particularly in Saudi Arabia is now investing in deep tech and in healthcare per se. As I told you earlier, it's contributing to 12.4 of the GDP in 2023, so this 2030, sorry. So this will impact the awareness and the direction if we are aligned with the government and how to use this technology to help them. Definitely that will help.
Very interesting. And Joanne, a question for you as an investor in deep tech. If let's say you have 5 minutes to listen to a pitch, what would you look for as a success factor to decide to invest in a deep tech startup?
One, as all investors will say, they're looking for that unique technology, okay? And that's hard to say. What's unique to one investor will be different to another investor. So we have a due diligence team within Reds, and we look at the technologies, and just because of the team, we're starting, which ones each partner would like more than the other. So when we receive a few thousand, let's say, pitch decks a year, okay? And from those, we sort them out. And then we go a deeper dive and everything that sort. It's not just about the tech, it's also about the commercialization. Mm-hmm. As one of our partners said, is that if you put a bunch of if there's a problem, a technical problem, you put a bunch of techies together, they'll solve it in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Commercialization is a whole different story. And not every, especially when it's deep tech, is that the CEO who is a tech background may have that knowledge set. And that's something that we look at with them to see what you call coachable. How solid are they and say, no, I have to be CEO no matter what. When you work with them, you realize they're not CEO material. They're good as a technology CTO, but it's a greater challenge to be a CEO. So those are the challenges we face when we invest, especially since we invest at pre-seed level, which is the riskiest part. And so we look really at the founder's background, who they are, where they come from. And so we're investing in the people first and then the tech.
Very interesting. And a question to you, Dr. Waddah, on this. Given that these are like the different success factors that investors look for, can you tell us a bit more about your journey with finding investment? How did you pitch your company? And also, what's the vision for the company going forward, assuming that funding is not a question?
Well, from the beginning, I was just a doctor who works in the hospital for the last 15 years. And when AI and technology arose, I was threatened, and I felt in a way that I need to understand the technology so it will not be my enemy. And based on that, I started loving this AI technology and seeing the impact in my specialties in radiology and imaging, and how can it help patient lives and save them. And after this story began, I started with the team in Alpha Iota, our vision in finding solutions that help the doctors, specifically in diagnosis, in per se medicine and so on. The stories behind the successful pitches to the investors is showing the impact to patients. In healthcare per se, it's much easier because every one of us have a bad experience in a hospital, or someone he lost due to misalignment in diagnosis, and so it is easier for me to explain the impact with the journey of that patient. And so far, this was my pitch all the time, is like, listen, this will help you in the diagnosis, preventive medicine, and so on.
Very interesting. And speaking of investing in healthcare, Joanne, from your experience, what opportunities for investment in deep tech, be it in healthcare or outside healthcare, do you see coming soon in the next 3 to 4 years, let's say?
So I'll be upfront with you. Reds, yes, we invest in medtech, but we haven't yet. And usually we would not go into that field because we don't have the deep expertise in it. So we would be more of a follower of someone else, another investor who invested, and then it makes sense to us. So that's the thing you got to look with investors. Look at the companies they invested in and see if it follows with what you're doing. If there's similarities, that will help.
I can add just that the pharmaceutical companies now mainly are investing in deep tech per se in the drug discovery process, where there are many companies now listed and owned by the pharmaceutical based on a very software or deep tech technology and AI. This is one area. The other areas that you can discuss is digital twin, where we talk about how to have a preventive medicine in all your life, where you know if the micro habit change, and so using the data and AI. So these are the most common areas that you can see in healthcare.
Interesting. And just a question for both panelists. Do you see that there is one area of deep tech or one sector of deep tech where it's easier to raise funds simply because there's higher demand, or maybe the returns are higher or the timelines are shorter?
Again, I'm going to talk in the healthcare. Whatever is much mature and have a, let's say, a strong infrastructure, I think it is the areas that investors are looking. A real case, commercialized study cases are ready to be done. All these are the elements that will raise it faster than other in healthcare.
The challenge in the last year, especially with VC funding, is one, the valuation of startups have decreased tremendously. And also there's less investment money from a VC perspective. If you start thinking of not always going to an investor, but see if you can talk to corporate innovators. so that they become customers of yours, so that you get undiluted funding because they see the value of your tech and say, this makes sense for us to implement in our company. And a medical, obviously, is with the hospitals or in the medical environment. If you can get that and engage with government, and some governments are more pro-innovation and working with startups and bringing that forth in their ecosystem than others. So you got to find which governments are more into that than others. And also, obviously, which hospital, if you're medical, which hospitals are more prone to implementing new tech.
I actually love that you mentioned the idea of looking outside VC funding, because typically for a startup to raise funds, the first place they look to is either bootstrapping or potentially from friends and family. But in deep tech, the amount of funding you need to raise goes beyond what friends and family can give. So if you had to give advice to someone who's starting a deep tech startup or company and they want to look for their first pre-seed funding, where would be the places to go for to find also good money, good investment that will give them guidance, not just funds?
So if you're looking for deep tech, and I'll separate it again from deep tech, which is more hardware-oriented, versus AI, okay? As I said earlier, AI is more abundant. But if you're doing deep tech where there's hardware, it's more difficult. And I remember working with a deep tech hardware accelerator, and we start listing them out. There's only a few hundred globally that's at the pre-seed level. So there's not that many. So it's looking at, if you are to go into, see if you can get connected with an accelerator where they can open up the market, not just from an investor perspective, but also possible customers. The key is customers. Okay, so if you can do that, that would be great. And also look for government grants. Okay, I don't know how the government grants are here. So
yes, so like an example, in Saudi Arabia, we have many authorities that support startups, such as Musha'at, another accelerator, and universities as well. And these are the main partners for any startup. They will support you financially, resources as well, and regulation process. In fact, they will start even communicating with the authorities and giving you advantage against the bigger companies, such as 10%, let's say, ahead of any operation, reducing cost on you. And government is so far in the MENA city and GCCs are helping a lot.
And is there currently a lot of competition for these support system or government, let's say, grants currently in the region, or do you see that the sector is still maturing?
Well, I don't think that the result came already, because it's like 4 to 5 years, and as we mentioned, the cycle of that journey it will take longer time. However, there are many examples of in healthcare in JCC that started from an accelerator and they went to raise 2 or 3 rounds again. So I believe the journey is still in the beginning. Still, the result is not clear to the moment.
And a question to also both panelists from a fund seeker perspective and an investor perspective. Is it common to invest in deep tech startups, let's say, in a foreign region where the fund is not based, or maybe seek investment from a foreign fund, not a fund in the Middle East, for example?
That comes back down to the fund thesis. So when the fund gets established, they work with the investors who put money into the fund, and they will predetermine which regions they're willing to invest in. So usually, as we're building up the IEEE Entrepreneurship Deep Summit series, where we will want to connect investors with startup founders, is that we're holding it in the region for the simple reason the majority of investors invest in the region. So if you had a U.S. investor, it's very rare they will invest in this area, and vice versa. Okay, and so those are the things you just have to be cognizant of, and there's a lot of homework that each founder must do to find out, are they willing to invest in your region or not?
Yeah, just to add one point is the regulations. Always the first question for the investors is, what's the country regulation? As you know that each country have its own regulation regarding the investment process. This might be a challenge of understanding the process, and the investor will be like little bit away or questioning more regarding that type of regulations.
Very interesting. And Joanne, A question for you regarding to the different investment that Reds Capital has made so far. Would love to know if there is one or two investments that come to mind that you think have like plenty of potential to go in the next 5 years that you've already invested in. Would love to hear from you if you have one or two investments in your portfolio that you think have a huge potential in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years.
Probably a few of them, and the one of them that has the greatest investment potential, the ones that we invested in, is because we invested at pre-seed level, and it's based on the founders. And where they have the greatest potential is because they're in the process of commercializing right now. Because it takes many years, especially in deep tech, before your technologies will develop. Yes, you have your MVP, but there's still more to be added after the MVP. So we may have a couple of them that we see that they'll keep going for another 5, 10 years, and hopefully we'll get a unicorn. But just based on the VC model, a VC model is that you have a certain number that will absolutely fail. They will close up shop. And then the majority of them will just do well, okay? And if you're lucky, you'll get a unicorn, okay? But that doesn't always happen. So we're hoping.
Thank you for sharing, Joanne. And I think the last question from my side, like before we open it up for Q&A from the audience, is to Dr. Waddah. As someone who went through the process of creating or starting a deep tech company in healthcare and AI, and went through the route of actually raising funds, what changes in the ecosystem in the region do you think are needed in the next couple of years to kind of enable other startups and other founders to go into deep tech and AI?
Well, successful stories, this is number one. And the support of the government and accelerators and VCs, ventures, this will give an advantage for everyone to see a real impact, and as well in the marketplaces. These are the elements that will help and support fintechs as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to open it up for one or two questions from the audience.
When it comes to government regulation in the healthcare section, how do you deal with data collection and the privacy of the data?
This is one of the biggest issues we have in how to protect patient data and automate the data to the use. And up to this moment, I'm talking about our experience, we are getting the data from outside, whereas it's for R&Ds and research, rather than from through hospitals. And if we are getting them from a true hospital, then we need to automate the data and for the patient's security. So that's the process so far. And it is happening, and we are doing it like frequently, yes.
Why would the company give you its data?
Definitely for the commercialization process. You pay for it sometimes, or you can give them a potential future business model that they might be interested on. So these are the two.
We have time for one more question.
So how do you see the deep tech investment on Saudi Arabia taking place? Because I know that there is a lot of VCs and matched VCs from the PFI working on this sector. So can you tell us how the vision of 2030 applies with this?
Well, regarding the deep tech in Vision 2030, I think that there are many venture capitals that are available on forms. PIF is supporting us in all meanings. We are seeing as, again, a future, and we can see that in many elements in the region, and its impact in Saudi Arabia is very strong. I believe Saudi Arabia is pushing the VPs in that direction in the region. So, and the startups need to be encouraged to come to Saudi Arabia as well. Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Joanne. You mentioned that deep tech startups, it usually takes around 4 to 5 years till you reap the fruits of it. So what are the early markers, like as an investor, you look into the company that, like kind of a positive or green flags that this company might be a unicorn or a successful company?
So I can speak from a REDS perspective, and that will vary from investor to investor. So when we look at it, we look at the technology, how unique it is. It usually comes through patents, especially we work with a lot of excuse me, academic researchers. Then we look at the potential marketplace, not just in the local region, but globally, and see what's the potential for commercialization. Sorry. Then last but not least is the people.
Well, thank you so much for the questions. I think if there's one more, we can take it. We have one more in the front row, please, and then we can move on to the next session.
So being in the Saudi market, how do you find the right investor, and how do you know this is the right investor for yourself?
Yeah, again, I'm talking about healthcare. It's a little bit difficult to find investors because of the complexity of the technology. So education is one of the most important parts. The region company investors mainly are looking for real estate and straightforward investment that has a strong, they can see the impact in future. For us, it is a little bit different, showing them for us how we care for the patient, how we care of the successful stories. So I think giving them a story about the healthcare and the impact and deep tech will help them a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waddah, and thank you, Joanne, for the amazing insights on the challenges faced by startups in deep tech, what investors look for, and how to give investors the right story to convince them. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to take a quick picture and then move on to the next session.